everybody. This is Bioprocess Therapy Podcast. Today we have Lindsay Briner as our special guest. Welcome.
Hi, Dimitri. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So tell us about yourself and what you're up to, what your projects are, and
Sure.
yeah.
So I have a concept that I feel I'm pioneering alongside a lot of my mentors that I'm calling stabilized flow. And I've developed a brain retraining program to deliver people the experience of operating in stabilized flow. So a lot of people have heard of a flow state. And so what I've designed with my program is giving people the experience of a stabilized flow or a flow trait. And I deliver this program under the industry of executive coaching and leadership development training because I just really like working with high achievers. And also it has to do with performance excellence. And it's not just mastering, the one single task or activity that you want to be really good at. Like a lot of the flow state research is on professional athletes, musicians, artists, because they want to be really good at that one thing, and to have that flow state that starts and stops. But I help leaders of all kinds really develop this kind of mastery for all areas of life at all times. And I developed this program through a lot of my research. I did my PhD internship analyzing a huge data set from a 17-week long online course that combined different types of meditation techniques with different types of positive psychology methods, also known as self-directed applied neuroplasticity. And so I kind of took that framework as I was seeing clients throughout my graduate school program and created my own, where I also combined limiting belief work and just stuck with one specific style of meditation that upregulates the same area of the brain as flow. And so it's a combination of all of these different research-backed methods that I facilitate to basically learn a pathway in the brain for this experience of stabilized flow.
Wow. Can you say more about this So it's a meditation, right? Is that kind
Some
of
of it. So
uh
there's three primary pillars to my approach. One of those pillars is doing the limiting belief work, which is
mhm.
um, a synthesis of methods that I've been trained in to identify our conditioned mind, right? Or what I call like the false self narrative. Probably a lot of what you do with your therapy clients, right? Is like identifying what you adopted, um, in your childhood that gets reinforced culturally, what have you, and just getting like the gist of that story, that false self narrative. And then also so that's one pillar. The other pillar is the self-directed applied neuroplasticity methods, aka positive psychology. And that's kind of giving the narrative mind something more useful to do, right? Things as simple as forgiveness practices, gratitude practices. I have a whole collection of these techniques that I've designed for my clients, really busy people, to do like first thing in the morning when they wake up and at night before they fall asleep, programming the subconscious mind with the story of their best self, reauthoring the narrative mind.
Mhm.
But you can't out narrate the narrative mind,
Right.
So those are the two of the pillars. The third pillar is meditation. And I used to teach this like find your fit method of like introducing each primary lineage tradition of meditation and like being like, okay, pick the one that works best for you or that you like the best, right? But I eventually let go of that because what I found works best for me, and the path that I took in my own practice with the Sangha and lineage that I found. And I also discovered in my research that this specific style, the foundation of it is a specific kind of concentration training that upregulates the same area of the brain as flow. And so I just stuck with that method. And that's my favorite part of the thing because it's the most powerful because you shift out of the narrative mind completely. So we're doing some rewiring of the false self, the conditioned mind, coming into a healthy confidence with the best self, right? And then transcending the narrative completely and coming into non-dual awareness, total presence, coming in out of temporal processing of the default mode into the parallel processing of non-duality with concentration. And that's the meditation. It's a Dzogchen Buddhist style of Tibetan Buddhist meditation. And
Okay.
so I found that it's the combination of all these things that just really works for people.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, that's very similar to the work that I do and what we do with the process model. And well, particularly the first piece about the limiting belief, I think that's a really probably important piece. I think sometimes we call it edging. So it's like this idea of like if you um like if you like to call yourself something like, oh, I'm an introvert, for instance.
Yeah,
And then based on that idea of what you would call introvert, or it could be anything, but let's just say you identify yourself with some self-concept like introvert, and then based on that belief, you know that introverts don't like dance or something like that.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but then you may have an impulse within your body, like a spontaneous urge to move, or and then all of a sudden your self-concept kicks in and says, oh no, I'm an introvert, and based on by that definition I don't do that, or
yeah,
introverts don't do that. And so then all of a sudden you have a limiting, and that's what makes it limiting, because
yeah,
it goes against the impulse,
yeah,
because the idea goes against the impulse. So um what we do with edging is that the person has to like die to the belief,
yeah,
or let go of the belief, because it literally prevents the impulse from experiencing itself, because it's like a part of you wants to do something, but like your idea of yourself limits that actualization. So like, oh, I can't dance because I know myself to be introvert, so then I have to like let go of the idea that I'm an introvert, and it be maybe nothing at all, or choose another identity perhaps, or maybe, but best not to have an identity, and then so that I can dance. I don't
yeah,
know if that's similar to, does that make sense? Yeah.
yeah. That's a great example. And and I'm sure you do this in your work too, but really helping people get to like the root limiting belief, like at the core,
Oh, right, right.
the core wound, and like and naming it, and it's that limiting belief of that core wound, where we opted into this limiting belief of like, I'm not good enough, something is wrong with me, I'll always be alone, I'm unworthy of love, all these things that are universal, right? Then like, and it's usually when a child at a young age doesn't feel safe for whatever reason, and
Hmm.
then the brain has to explain. It's like like, and then like an explanation. It's just like how the brain works. Like we have to explain and make sense of why we don't feel safe. And then, in an underdeveloped mind, those get hardwired into our subconscious mind and generates a survival pattern in the nervous system, and
Hmm.
constructs all of these other surface layer limiting beliefs, right? If we can really get to the root one, name it, call it out, and really start to become familiar with how it's operating in our nervous system and how it elaborates in our repetitive thought forms, name it, call it out, and start to disidentify with all of the stories associated with it. And when the nervous system is not running on cortisol and adrenaline in the doing, in the go, 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 striving to prove something, to achieve whatever, right? Like, what is the nervous system doing? It's just when it's not doing the survival pattern, like by habit, right? It's just present. It's just right here, right now, right?
Hmm.
And then that's where like our true essence of like wanting to dance comes online, and like being more comfortable with stepping out of that you've named and called out and are starting to disidentify with, and then it becomes more natural to discover new qualities.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And it's interesting, like it's almost like the doing often is like overcompensation for the unworthiness, right? It's like I have to like do more because to overcompensate for my own feeling of on not enoughness or something, or that I feel unworthy and I have to do more. So that makes sense that the person does more so that they can keep it up. Um, I'm curious, how do you when you work with people, or like what is your like, because it seems like unworthiness is like probably the most fundamental like um core kind of wound, I guess you would call it, or experience that people usually have to overcome at the bottom. How do you, is there a way that you found effective, or like how do you like, other than like you saying naming it, disidentifying it, like what, I'm curious what's your experience with that process of unworthiness?
Yeah, well, it's the combination of all of these methods, and but that initial stage of becoming aware of where it comes from and why is really useful, and coming to see that it's like a hoax, right? That like we like bought opted into this belief based on a situation from our early childhood, and it's not actually what like our conscious mind probably believes about ourselves, right? But life was designed to set up, conditions to reinforce these constantly until we finally see that like we're living like a pattern to reinforce these stories about ourselves, instead of like living like from our true essence, living a life versus living a pattern. And when we can kind of see that cosmic joke, that we're operating from this limiting belief as a lens of perception, like into everything about life, like projecting the story just to have it proved back to us, right? And when we can see that kind of cosmic joke, we can see that it's a hoax that keeps us trapped, and so I think that when people continuously call it out and name it and do the deep work of getting clear about where it comes from and why, what happens is like a level of compassion, compassion for the self. My meditation teacher, Dr. Daniel P. Brown, he would always say that the foundation of being on this path, of being, a meditator and of reaching these higher stages of consciousness, the foundation is self-trust. And you can't have self-trust without self-love. So I work with my clients in a variety of ways to like have compassion for that story, see it as a false story, have the compassion, feel all of the emotions all the way through the body, to like give it space to breathe, give it space to move through, do the meditation techniques to like unhook those neural pathways from being locked in, and so it's really the combination of all of it that and it's like I work with high achievers, high performers, a lot of founders and CEOs, so I consider it like rewiring how motivation runs in our system, because like you said, that's what the inertia that drives us to achieve anything, to do anything, is to prove to ourselves or to prove to the world that we are worthy in some way. And that's like that how the axiom of motivation gets locked into fight or flight, into survival, right? And so it's about rewiring the limbic system and finding new ways to get motivated, from self-compassion. And then, usually what happens in these higher stages of is like being motivated by compassion for other people too. And it starts with the self, I share this Buddhist concept called bodhicitta with my clients, and generating bodhicitta at the beginning of every meditation. We set the intention that this practice and being on this path of personal development will not only positively benefit you, but also positively benefit all of the people, projects, and situations in your life, having an invisible, domino effect of positive impact into the world. And so by putting the self first as primary, the self-compassion first, we have access to being of service, more and more. And yeah, it's like generating a new way of being motivated.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I know. I find that too. Like, you know, I, that unworthiness has to be loved by, and there's nobody that can really do it but the person that's experiencing it. So it comes down to like kind of a curing or attending, at least for me in my work, like attending to loving that unlovableness or something. And
Yeah,
but it is hard. I find that I have compassion for people because as much as spiritual rhetoric, I think it is difficult for a person that was like, you know, abandoned by their parents to come into like a cosmic and maybe this is a different population, for instance. I mean, like people who are more uh high functioning may experience less of this, but I think it's difficult when the circumstances provided such a strong impression that you're unworthy, or that you were like completely like left behind or something like that. And then so it's so deep and so strong that it is takes a long time and sometimes really difficult to just unwind from or unhook from that um story, you know. So
yeah. It's a lifelong path, I think.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's like peeling layers of the onion, one layer at a time. Yeah, and
yeah,
I mean, I work with high functioning people, but like everyone has this, and these high achievers, like I think of being a high achiever as a coping mechanism in and of itself, you
right,
know. And
right.
so these people might not think that they need therapy, and they're working with me as a performance coach, but really like we get underneath the surface of why they think that they're perfect in the first place, as like a facade that they put up, as a coping mechanism to deal with the pain that's underneath the surface that they may not even be aware of initially,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a really powerful like thing that I think our society is it's like wrestling with. I think like from like part of what we teach is also like has to do with Taoism, which is kind of similar to Zen, but it's like this idea that you the striving that you experience towards like achievement, it is within itself a kind of like dragging.
Yeah,
It's like a laboring, which lacks flow, because you're forcing something. And you know, like you can say that it's like related to like industrial revolution and capitalism and like this like progressive force to get things done, to improve, to like get better, make more money. Like there's this sort of and that seems to be like the main, well, if you're looking at it from this Taoist perspective of like Wu Wei, non-forcing, it seems to be like that's the antithesis of being. Like it's this doing energy.
yeah,
Um, and and it's almost like we're all hijacked by this like striving,
yeah.
and it's really alluring. It's addictive. It's like such a like awesome feeling we all wanted, but it seems to be the almost like the problem.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we live in a civilization that teaches us that we are not enough and to always like do more, make more, have more, buy more, and it reinforces these childhood experiences. And that's what I call the hall of mirrors, right? This feedback loop that of reinforcing us into the stress response. And it is really challenging to snap out of it. And, non-doing, is the fourth stage of realization and Mahamudra that I teach these stages of realization, and the fourth stage is non-doing, and it takes a lot to get, you know, I would say I get people usually through the first three stages, because that it's a really advanced stage, this Wu Wei, to be a human being instead of a human doing, and
Hmm.
it takes such incredible diligence and discipline to be on a path of practice, to have that as a direct experience of, the spontaneity of that effortlessness, and I think it's more complex than linear stages of personal growth. And like I don't know about a lot about your spiral process
Hmm.
therapy, but I think of it of growth also as a spiral. There's a complexity to it, and we might have glimpses into this experience of wu wei, of non-doing, non-meditation, you know, and it's like it's a lifelong path.
Right, right. Yeah, and if you want to go really deep into it, it's like you can't not be in flow because that's an unstoppable force, that the flow. The only thing you can do is resist the flow.
Yeah,
It's already there. Like you can't not be in flow. Like you're always in flow, but it's your resistance to the flow which makes it harder for you to experience it.
yeah,
And in that way, it's like you're saying, it's non-linear because you're not like it's not some eventual thing that you'll be awarded once you get there. It's
yeah,
like it's always
yeah,
there,
yeah. It's
you
always
know?
right here. Yeah,
Yeah,
but it's coming to see that like you know, the flow or the non-dual nature of reality, like it's co-emergent with duality, right? We wouldn't have this experience of non-dual awareness without the contrast to duality. They're co-emergent, right? We
right.
wouldn't know our true essence without the contrast to these limiting beliefs. They're co-occurring. You know, you can't have one without the other. Samsara and nirvana, co-emergent.
Right.
One's not better than the other. And when you take that lens of like perception of the great perfection and can not just trust yourself, but trust reality, you can lean in to that flow, the no resistance to existence. But
Hmm. Hmm.
it's hard to, yeah, it's, but I really like teaching this, these stages of realization in Mahamudra because I teach them like really incrementally, you know, one cognitive skill set at a time, and really make sure that each person, each individual is mastering each cognitive skill, or what the Tibetans call pith instructions, within each stage of realization before introducing them to the next stage. I think of it as like uploading code, you know, and once the code is uploaded, the program's running and it's just there, and it's this like incremental process of introducing these techniques. It's really beautiful.
Do you want to go through the stages or you like?
Sure. um, the first stage is one pointedness, which is concentration training. So the final skill of that stage is bringing online metacognitive awareness, being aware of awareness. So like sitting in a sitting practice, that's when you're able to detect distraction upon arising before it becomes symbolic, right? So you can kind of like every distracting thought or distracting sensation has a directionality to it in the field of awareness. And you can, metacognition is when you can begin to sense that directionality pull you. In Tibetan, they call it zimba, like a grab, right?
Oh, you can
And
follow it type of thing if you want to.
it, well, yeah, but the idea in concentration training is to not follow it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then once you master concentration and metacognition, the next stage is called freedom from elaboration, which is where I'll start introducing techniques on emptiness, emptiness of self, emptiness of phenomena, um, you know, getting into non-duality, no inside, no outside. But I think a lot of Western meditation teachers stop there in non-dual awareness, which I think is dangerous because it can lead to disassociation and depersonalization.
Right.
And then meditation is used as a coping mechanism itself, right? So
Yeah,
this,
that's a big problem, right? You just
yeah,
check out or something, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
then, yeah.
yeah. So freedom from elaboration is not just non-duality, but it's also non-locality, you know, into phenomena, concept of time. You know, flow has the subjective characteristic of timelessness, you know. The third stage is one taste. And that's when, so the freedom from elaboration has a lot to do with stabilizing emptiness, this vast expanse of the field of awareness being not just like no inside, no outside, a timeless, boundless in every direction. But then you come back in this third stage of realization to everything as one taste. The liveliness is still there, the self is still there. There's an uninterrupted flow of liveliness, but you view the liveliness of self, all of the content of experience, from the view of emptiness, of the wide open, empty sky. And then everything that arises in the field of experience is viewed as vividly appearing yet insubstantial, like a rainbow in the sky, right? Nothing wrong with it, all perfect and beautiful, primordially pure, right? So, but you're leisurely non-engaged. You don't get caught up in the stories wrapped around these limiting beliefs. You can kind of hold it more loosely. They're still there, they're still a part of you, but you don't like chase after or turn away from, right? They're still there. They're like an ocean viewing its own waves,
No
right?
no craving, no aversion, right?
Yeah, the middle path.
Yeah.
And then the fourth stage is non-meditation, bringing the practice off the cushion into all times and all situations, the non-doing, being in this view of the vast expanse of emptiness, liveliness, holding the emptiness and the liveliness as equal and the same, like a perfect mirror reflection, that co-emergence of experience in duality and non-duality, right? And suffering and bliss equal and the same, like a mirror reflection. And then you can really get a taste of that wu wei.
Yeah, yeah. And then, it's interesting, like, so with like the process model, we talk about like, so we like to call it allowance, which is like this, that's what we tattoo on our foreheads, metaphorically. But the allowance is like well, obviously the opposite of resistance. And it's synonymous with flow. And some people call it permittance, but I think it's a little too like pedagogical. Allowance is a little light. And it's different from acceptance, because acceptance is more final, like, oh, I accept it or I don't accept it. But allowance is more of like this kind of moment to moment, like allowing of the experience. Um, but it's the non-duality piece, I think, is important, because it's like if you make allowance only about feeling good, or feeling like, oh yes, I'm like in flow, and I'm in like I'm shooting these hoops and they're all making it in to the basket, and I'm feeling like really in flow. And I think that's what's kind of like you're saying, like I resonate with your like idea and like model, because that becomes very opportunistic in a way, because you're like, okay, like I'm gonna cherry pick like this I want to be in flow with, but then like I don't like the bad stuff. And so there's a kind of versatility with allowance, because like I don't know who said it. There was like this uh Dr. Suzuki or Alan Watts, he was saying something like, they asked him like, oh well, what is enlightenment? And he's like, well, it's really the same thing as you normally experience it, just like a foot off the ground. So it's like slightly up, but like it's the same thing, meaning that like if you're in a misery state, or you're grieving, or like you're something happened that like you're just feeling really crappy, that the flow is with that too, like that it
Yeah,
isn't, it's not that you don't feel suffering, but you're in allowance of the suffering, so that the suffering becomes like a wave. It's almost like a sludge of like, it's just like something pouring out, and
yeah,
like it doesn't matter what it is, because if you start to discriminate and say, well, I only like this type of flow, or I only like this type of flowing experience, only joy. Uh,
present. Okay.
d- does that resonate with you
Yeah,
too?
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the word equanimity.
Oh, equanimity. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Equanimity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the kind of modern way that I describe that is like no cringe, non-judgment and non-reactivity towards self and other. When you like cringe because you're having this bad experience, judging yourself, judging someone else, or in some sort of discomfort, there's this cringe, there's a contraction, and that's the resistance, right? But I like your word allowance, when you just are perfectly okay and trusting whatever arises in experience. The Tibetans say that there's 86,000 different negative states that the human can experience in any given moment. And we did the math on that. I wish I could remember, but there's not enough words in the English language that could describe 86,000 different unique states, and negative states. But they also believe that on the other side of every single negative state is a wisdom quality. And so it's like this trust to believe that any negative experience has an opportunity for the wisdom quality, for an upgrade, that there's always an upgrade that's occurring. That's this trust, like in the wisdom of reality, teaching you whatever you need to teach along the way.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to the whole complementary co-arising experience.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like betrayal, forgiveness thanks betrayal, because it's like forgiveness says, oh, thank you for existing, because without you I wouldn't be born. Like it's like you have to be somebody had to have done something wrong to you for then you to experience forgiveness. If nobody ever did nothing wrong to anybody else, we wouldn't have you wouldn't have the opportunity to forgive. And so
Yeah.
forgiveness is like dependent on um wrongdoing, because that's what the definition of forgiveness is. So like
Yeah.
is that what you mean by like
Yeah.
the
It's
wisdom of those negative, well, they're not even negative, but yeah, like those
trust,
un
trusting that there's an opportunity to learn something, and the idea is that you'll be able to instantaneously gain that insight, that wisdom insight for these negative states moment by moment. That's that's the goal at least. But I'm curious, can I ask you a question? How do you deal with because what we're talking about here, there's this risk or this trap that I see um in like non-dualist, like an ethical loophole,
Mhm.
for like bad behavior.
Can
How
you
do you
speak?
how do you how do you how do you work around that loophole of like, well, if everything's perfect and there's wisdom and negativity, so how do you grapple with bad conduct then from that view for yourself or
There's
with
no
your
such thing
client
as first of all, there's no such thing as bad conduct, because bad is a concept.
or
Uh,
like integrity and ethics?
those are also concepts.
Yeah.
Um, the way that I deal with it, and it actually relates to Buddhism, is that it's has to do with sensibility. So that like on an experiential level in my organism, um, certain actions are going to be inconsistent with an experience of joy or ease. Like ease is probably closer to non-concept than like even joy, which is a concept. But like certain behaviors will create ease on an experiential level. Like I'll have less muscular tension, and so I can learn by trial and error that, okay, if I do this behavior, then I experience constriction in my muscular tension that will create like suffering in me. So
Mhm.
it would make more sense to do the other behavior than the one that,
Mm,
and so like that's what they teach in Buddhism. Like for instance, they say, oh, it's not that you can't, it's not that it's bad to steal, but if you steal, more than likely you're gonna get caught up with like somebody's gonna like complain, like things like in a village situation, it's gonna come back and then you're gonna experience tension. And so it's
mm,
not that it's wrong. You should go on, you can do it, but like it's probably inconsistent with an experience of joy. So it's not gonna lead to an experience both inside and socially. So I think that it gives freedom to say, yes, you get to do this behavior, but let's try it on and let's see, does it make sense to you? Meaning, is it like sensible in your body
mm. So
instead of it being morally right
yeah,
or wrong?
yeah, I appreciate that.
Does that does that
Yeah,
make sense?
yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it take a risk, because that's the question of like, okay, do we trust each other? Like, do we trust ourselves, our organism? Do we trust other people? And um, can, like when a client comes in and they're like, oh, I just cheated on my wife or something like that. And then all I can do is just be like, okay, well, notice, like, lean in and notice what it's like to make that decision, and for yourself, notice how it feels, not
Yeah.
in the realm of right and wrong.
Yeah.
You know, what do you think?
Yeah, I appreciate that the somatic angle on that. Um, and what I've learned in Buddhism and from my teachers is that, the only evidence of your progress on the path of stabilizing awakened awareness or attaining Buddhahood in this lifetime is conduct, how other people experience you. So that would be in alignment with that somatic, like what's going to actually consequentially create more tension and take throw you off of being on this path is conduct that can create that tension that you described.
Right. And I think that we have to lean on sensibility because throughout history, what constitute conduct has changed a lot. Like, for instance, like slavery used to be legal or something, or like like the war on drugs policies change, and so like it, it, that's why it's like misleading to be conceptual or moralistic about it, because that comes from a more of a consensus reality of like, okay, this is right and this is wrong, maybe religious ideas too thrown in there. And so if you're trying to reach for what is right and wrong, what has integrity, what doesn't have integrity from the conceptual realm, you're like subject to error, because you're going to be like duped, because you're like, well, no, I like to take this drug, but like the government says it's wrong. So like then you get tripped up. So like it has to come from within to notice, oh, does this feel sensible for me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, yeah, the reaching into the concepts of right and wrong and good and bad and morality and integrity um, is like, I agree with you on that. And it comes back to like is the central organizing principle of your life, like being on this path of personal growth, and that any kind of ethics and integrity doesn't need to be reached for. There's just like an automatic occurrence of greater levels of good conduct or of ethics that have to do with the basic human decency and respectful consideration to all beings and all life along the way. Like when we reach, as Maslow described, when we have developmental stage growth, which is just maturity of becoming more self-aware as we grow into adulthood. He added self-transcendence to the top of his original pyramid when he had a near-death experience, and that is when the locus of identity, the locus of the sense of self shifts from, being more egocentric, self-centered, and motivated by self-actualization to like a shift into the locus of identity into an interconnected worldview, coming into the direct realization that everything is connected. And then the motivational axiom starts running from that realization of connectivity. And then that there's a natural progressive upgrade to our ethics as we deepen into these higher stages of
Mhm.
practice, when we become more operating more out of this field of connectivity with the care and consideration and compassion for that direct realization rather than operating from self-interest.
Yeah. Yeah, and what comes to mind is also that I think that it's probably a seminal ingredient in that is to feel your own pain, um, because that's what helps you understand why somebody else is hurting, and then that's the next step towards compassion. Because it's like I think maybe people are like numbing themselves or disassociated from their own pain, and so like you can't even begin to be compassionate or feeling globally interconnected. Um,
Unless you can feel yourself all the way through.
right.
Otherwise, it's a pseudo transcendence because
Yes.
it's associating.
Right.
Yeah,
So that's why it's a personal deep dive into like feeling through
yeah,
your own pain that makes you compassionate.
yes, I totally. I teach from the 15 principles of conscious leadership. And one of these principles is feel your feelings all the way through. And it sounds so like cheesy, with these like type A CEOs, founders of all these startups, like feel your feelings all the way through. And like, oh, this is actually like a central piece to what we're doing here. And it's so these high achievers, have this operating system of like kind of like up and out, the survival pattern in the body, like a very cerebral, very extroverted, very smart, kind of like wearing the nervous system on the outside, the achiever mode, and so many people are like this, especially in a culture where we seek external validation constantly to feel that sense of worthiness through social media, entrepreneurship, whatever, so it's about turning the nervous system onto the inside. And it's really like it blows me away how learning that like muscle of turning inward and just listening to the body is such like foreign terrain for so many people. And I had to learn it myself. I'm like, I work with high achievers because like I am one and I can relate to them most, and all of these techniques are the ones that have worked best for me, so it's my practice too. But it's such a critical piece to like wear our nervous system on the inside and self mode as primary, feel everything all the way through.
Yeah. Yeah, it's scary for people sometimes to even close their eyes or
Yeah.
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 It is. hmm Well, looks like we have a few minutes left. Um, yeah, do you have any closing statements or um
Sure. Yeah. I just wanted to say thank you, Dimitri, because I didn't share a lot of my history, but you were a pivotal influence in my life at such a young age. We did our undergrad together. And I remember vividly, and this is part of my story that I usually share about how I got on this path because I was a competitive long distance runner my whole life, starting really young, like in fourth grade. And, was in college with you running cross country. And I got injured. And we were hanging out at the time, taking a bunch of psychology classes together. And I was injured, and we were talking, and you were like, "Well, have you ever done yoga?" And I was like, "What? What's yoga?" And I came over to your house, and you introduced me to cacao beans, and showed me some YouTube videos, and it really was a pivotal moment where my life path completely changed direction. And I started to realize that there were these alternative methods to self-soothe and to self-regulate that existed out of the adrenaline of extreme sports that I had been used to for my whole life growing up with an older brother. And I was like, I was lost when I got injured from running because I was like, who am I without this, like this identity piece. And that was my self-care. That's how I regulated myself. That was my therapy. And you introduced me to this whole alternative world that essentially led to our graduate program at ITP and to everything that I'm doing today. So thank you.
man, I that's such a blur. That was such a long time ago. Um,
Yeah. We're
I
old now.
appreciate I appreciate you saying that, and I'm I don't want to say proud of you, but I yeah, I'm proud of you that you're doing so well and that you have such a beautiful program and um
Thank
maybe
you
we
for
could
being
do
part of my story, Dimitri.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Maybe we could do a part two sometime. This has been
Yeah.
great. I feel like there's a lot more we could talk about. Um,
Yeah.
all the best to you, and we'll talk soon.
Okay.
All right. Bye,
Take
Lindsay.
care.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye bye.